Welcome back to the deep dive. Usually we're here to unpack, the latest in tech or maybe a slice of history. But today
Is different.
we're doing something very different. We're wading into the absolute deep end of human psychology. And I want to be upfront with you right from the start. The source material we are unpacking today is heavy.
It is heavy, but it's also, I think, necessary.
Exactly. We're looking at a text that analyzes the roots of some of the most extreme human harms. We're talking about pedophilia, fake consent, and cannibalism. Now, I know what you might be thinking, and you might be reaching for the pause button because that sounds like a nightmare true crime episode. But I want to be very, very clear. This is not that.
No, absolutely not. We're not here to share lurid details or shock you. This isn't sensational.
Not at all.
The text we're looking at is actually a clinical analysis. It's almost architectural. It strips away the horror movie stuff and asks a really fundamental question.
Which is?
What has to break? What has to completely fall apart inside a human mind to make these behaviors possible?
And that's our mission today. We are looking at the mechanics of violation. The source material opens with a very bold thesis. It says these phenomena, as different as they seem, are really just symptoms of the same root cause. It calls them expressions of severe distortion.
Right. And it's important to catch what the text is rejecting there. It's arguing these aren't expressions of nature or some, uncontrollable urge.
Like we often hear.
Exactly. The text uses a phrase that really anchors the whole discussion. It says these harms arise where coherence collapses.
Coherence collapses. Okay, I want to stick a pin in that because that feels like the spine of this entire deep dive. When we talk about psychological coherence, what are we actually describing?
Think of it like the structural integrity of your reality. I mean, in a coherent mind, I recognize that I exist, and I recognize that you exist as a separate person.
There's a boundary.
There's a boundary. The collapse happens when that distinction, it blurs or it's willfully ignored. The text argues that all three of these things, pedophilia, coercive consent, cannibalism, are all just different flavors of the same failure.
The failure to see other people as real.
The failure to recognize the reality of other people, yes.
So if that's the collapse, the building falling down inside the psyche, the text then identifies a core mechanism that causes the foundation to crack. Power without empathy. But that feels a bit like a buzzword we hear all the time. How does the source break that down into something more, concrete?
It moves beyond the buzzword pretty quickly. It outlines what it calls a triad of replacement. Basically, for a mind to justify these harms, three specific substitutions have to occur.
Okay.
First, domination replaces relationship. Second, entitlement replaces consent.
And the third?
The third is the most critical, probably the most terrifying. Objectification replaces recognition.
Okay, let's drill down on that one. Objectification. That's a word that gets thrown around so much in pop culture. Oh, that ad is objectifying. But here, in this clinical sense, what is the text actually saying happens in the brain?
It's describing an ontological shift, a shift in the state of being. The source explains that there's a specific moment where a perpetrator stops seeing another person as a who and starts seeing them as what?
A who to a what?
They cease to be an autonomous being with feelings, rights, and inner life. And they just become a resource, a body, a symbol.
So it's not just treating someone badly. It's a fundamental error in perception. You're no longer interacting with a human. You're managing inventory.
Exactly. And this is the crucial insight. Once that switch is flipped, once the other person's just a thing, harm isn't just possible. It becomes logical.
Logical.
You don't ask a hammer for consent. You don't empathize with a sandwich. If you view a person as a resource, then using them is just logistics.
Yeah.
And the text argues this is the prerequisite for all the harms we're about to discuss.
That is a terrifying reframing. It takes the emotion out and just shows the cold machinery underneath. So let's apply this. The first specific harm the text analyzes, pedophilia.
Right. This is a tough one to talk about, but the text is very rigorous. It spends a lot of time dismantling the myths we tell ourselves.
Like what?
You often hear people, sometimes even apologists, talk about misdirected love or confusion.
Or they use terms like intergenerational attraction, trying to soften it.
Exactly, and the source material just absolutely rejects that. It states very clearly, pedophilia is a pathological attraction to those who cannot consent. Full stop.
And it argues it's not even about sexuality.
Not in the healthy adult sense. It says it arises from a desire for control and a fixation on vulnerability.
That distinction feels vital, separating sexuality from control. Because if it's about control, it changes how we understand why the targets are children.
The text calls it arrested emotional development.
Yeah.
Specifically, it's an inability or maybe a refusal to relate to equals. Think about what an adult relationship requires. Negotiation, handling rejection. An equal can challenge you. An equal can leave you.
And an equal can see you for who you really are.
Precisely. The text suggests the perpetrator is terrified of that dynamic, so they retreat to one where they hold all the cards. They target children, not because of love, but because children lack three specific things: power, capacity, and protection.
So it's an act of cowardice, then?
In a structural sense, yes. It's seeking a human interaction where the defenses are essentially zero. The text is very firm that any attempt to intellectualize this, to make it sound spiritual or aesthetic,
That's just a further distortion.
it's a smokescreen. It hides the fact that this is purely about exploitation of the defenseless. The abuser is building a fantasy world where they are God, and the child is just a prop.
Chilling. But that clarity is necessary. Now, this idea of capacity brings us directly to the second topic, fake consent, this one. This one feels like it applies to a much broader slice of life.
Absolutely. This is the section that I think will resonate with the most listeners, because we see versions of this everywhere. We tend to view consent as a binary switch.
Right. Did they say yes or did they say no? If you signed the contract, if you said the words consent happened, legally, that's often the line.
But the source argues that a yes can be fake. It defines fake consent as what happens when pressure replaces choice.
Pressure replaces choice. That's a strong definition. So how do we distinguish between, say, a reluctant yes, like agreeing to do the dishes, and a fake yes?
The text makes a critical distinction here. It's between consent that is offered and consent that is extracted.
Extracted.
If you have to wring the yes out of someone through fear, dependency, just wearing them down, that's not consent. That is submission. The text lists three requirements for true consent: capacity, freedom, and safety. If even one of those is missing, the consent is void.
Is there a litmus test? Because, I mean, in the real world, there's always some pressure. Do this project or you won't get promoted. Is that fake consent?
The text offers a specific test that I found really, really powerful. It says, when saying no is unsafe, consent is impossible.
When saying no is unsafe, consent is impossible.
Yeah.
That hits hard.
Think about that. In a workplace, a religious group, if your boss asks you for personal favor, something outside your job, and you know saying no means you'll be fired or blacklisted or just socially ostracized,
You can't actually consent.
you literally cannot. You can only obey. The source notes this is rampant in exploitative labor, in manipulative spiritual groups, because it pretends two people are on a level playing field when one is holding a gun, metaphorically or literally.
It brings up a cynical question, though. If the person has the power, the boss, the guru, the abuser, why bother with the charade? Why do they need the victim to say yes at all?
That's the psychological twist. The text argues that fake consent exists solely to protect the abuser, not the participant.
Protect the abuser.
It's a shield for their conscience. It lets the person in power tell themselves, well, they agreed to it. They wanted it. It protects them from having to face the reality that they are a violator.
So it's a way to maintain that illusion of coherence we talked about at the start. It stops them from seeing themselves as a villain. It's a mechanism to avoid guilt.
Exactly. It safeguards the perpetrator's ego at the expense of the victim's reality.
Okay, we have to move to the third topic. And I'll admit, when I saw this in the source material, I was surprised. Cannibalism. We usually think of this in terms of survival, the Donner Party. But the text treats it as a psychological phenomenon.
It frames this as the ultimate collapse of relational boundaries. If pedophilia is about control and fake consent is about coercion, cannibalism is about consumption.
It seems like the most extreme version of that objectification we started with. The absolute endpoint of turning a who into a what.
It is. The text describes a symbolic breakdown. In a healthy mind, there's a boundary. I am me, you are you, I cannot be you. In the distorted mind of the cannibal, again, we're talking pathology, not survival. Symbolic meaning replaces reality.
What does that mean, symbolic meaning?
They believe that by consuming the other person, they can somehow take on their power, their identity, their essence.
It sounds like magical thinking.
It is magical thinking. The text calls it a delusion where consumption replaces relationship. It's an attempt to solve an internal emptiness by physically assimilating another human being. It's a total erasure of the other person. They don't just lose their autonomy, they lose their physical existence to feed a fantasy.
It's fascinating in a dark way how the text links this back to identity. It's not about hunger, it's about a fragile self trying to bolster itself by devouring someone else.
Right. It's the ultimate failure to recognize other people are real. To the cannibal, the victim is just fuel, matter, the complete loss of the other.
So we've looked at these three distinct horrors, but the text makes a point that I think is crucial. These things don't just pop up out of nowhere. They're not random lightning strikes. They grow in specific kinds of soil.
This is the systems analysis part of the text, and it's so important because it shifts the focus from just evil individuals to broken environments. It asks, what are the shared conditions that let these distortions thrive?
And what's the biggest red flag?
Secrecy, that's number one, but followed very closely by hierarchy without accountability.
Explain that one. Hierarchy without accountability.
When you have a structure, a family, a church, a company, where the person at the top answers to no one, where they cannot be questioned, you're creating a petri dish for this kind of distortion. The text also mentions trauma without treatment and isolation from relational norms.
That isolation piece makes a lot of sense. If you cut a group off from the rest of the world, there's no one there to say, hey, wait a minute, this isn't normal.
Exactly. The text says these behaviors thrive where reality is overridden by fantasy. If you're in a closed system where the leader's fantasy becomes law and there's no outside reality check, coherence collapses very quickly. And critically, they thrive where empathy is undeveloped or even actively suppressed.
So if that's the disease, this collapse, this soil of secrecy and unchecked power, what's the cure? The text pivots to prevention, to solutions. How do we rebuild that structural integrity?
Well, the structural answers are what you might expect, but they're vital. Clear, enforced boundaries, protection of the vulnerable, and going back to that hierarchy problem, accountability for power. No one can be above the check-in.
But it goes deeper than just policy, right?
It does. It talks about a cognitive shift. The text identifies one core concept as the antidote. It calls it the recognition of personhood.
The recognition of personhood.
That's the core solution.
That sounds simple, doesn't it? Treat people like people. But based on everything we just discussed, it seems like that's actually a really heavy cognitive lift.
It is the hardest work we do. Recognition isn't just being polite. It's the active, constant awareness that the person in front of you, your child, your employee, your partner, is a whole universe. They have agency. They have limits. They have a value that has absolutely nothing to do with what they can do for you.
It's about decentralizing yourself, realizing you aren't the main character and they aren't NPCs in your game.
That's a great way to put it. The text argues that when recognition is fully active, these violations become unthinkable. You physically cannot exploit a child or coerce a subordinate if you are vividly constantly aware of their reality. The psychological mechanism for the harm is dismantled. The objectification step can't happen.
So the firewall against evil isn't just being good, it's being awake, it's staying coherent.
Exactly. It's a movement from distortion to clarity.
I want to revisit the ethical stance the source takes at the very end. Because in a world that loves to debate nuance, to play devil's advocate, the text draws a very hard line here.
It does. It reinforces that understanding the mechanism, tracing the architecture like we just did, is not the same as excusing it. The text is adamant. These acts are not cultural differences. They are not complex expressions of desire. They are violations, period.
It reminds me of that line, we don't study fires to praise the arsonist, we study them to learn how to put them out.
That's it. As the text concludes, clarity exists to protect life, to restore boundaries, and to ensure responsibility. That is the utility of this analysis. It's not morbid curiosity. We analyze the darkness so we can recognize it when it shows up in our own systems and shut it down.
Clarity exists to protect life. That is a profound place to land. It suggests that being clear-eyed about the worst parts of humanity is actually an act of care.
I couldn't agree more.
We've covered a lot of intense ground today. We started with the collapse of coherence, where power replaces empathy. We looked at that triad of replacement,
Domination, entitlement, and objectification. And we saw how that machinery plays out in the control of pedophilia, the coercion of fake consent, and the consumption of cannibalism.
I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought from the source material. Something to mull over as you go about your week, maybe looking at the systems you're a part of. Your workplace, your community, even your own home.
The text ends by reminding us that these behaviors don't arise from freedom. They arise from the collapse of reality.
So the question is this. In your own sphere of influence, are you building coherence? Are you reinforcing the boundaries and the recognition that make harm unthinkable? Or are you, maybe without realizing it, letting the yes become expensive?
That's the question that matters.
Thanks for taking this deep dive with us. We know it was a heavy one, but we believe it was a necessary one. Take care of yourselves, stay coherent, and we'll see you next time.